Hello. Today thought I would talk a little about free will, redemption, possibly, um, the afterlife, how I think it works, possibly. Um, why does bad happen to good people, and brokenness? So I thought I would start off with a little metaphysical guess. And people say sin is missing the mark or being less than you could be, and so on. And I thought I would map out Carl Jung a little bit with how I think the afterlife works and so on. So basically, Carl Jung has a quote that the privilege of being alive is to be able to become who you truly are. And sin is less than, and godliness is more than, in a fundamental sense. Not less than being who you are, but less versus more in general. Um, Individuation, as Carl Jung would put it, is very closely knitted with the phrase, the glory of God is a human being fully alive. And you might wonder why God would break a good man, and so on. Keep in mind that God looks to the infinity and eternity, and we look towards a limited time frame in this world. So there's two types of brokenness, but they follow a fundamental similar structure. The first brokenness is the tragic hero in God's eyes, or the he was weak in this life kind of brokenness. And that one will be re-upped in the afterlife, kind of like a divine pity fuck in some sense. Um, and so on. That's my truthful belief, at least. Um, Before I continue, I just want to say I believe it's right to say that some people will go to hell forever and some people will go to heaven forever in a certain sense. Um, the way it's right to say we have free will, even if logically we know God being all powerful, God being all knowing, and God creating everything, so nothing happens without Him willing it. Everything is God's credit or fault. But we take responsibility, and that increases our agency in a sense, or attunes our agency with God's will better, and then we're on the upward direction. And if you victim narrative too much, then you're on the downward direction. And if you assume you have control over other people too much, or that you deserve it, then it's a God complex and you're still down, even though you're so on. And you might go like, what's the difference between having more and more and more and more agency versus having a God complex? Because they're both about taking ownership of me acting on other things. And what that means is basically agency is how you respond to things. And saying you have control over how you respond to things more versus how you can control other things more is the difference. We should acknowledge that things can act on us, but the victim narrative is not helpful, generally speaking, beyond a limited scope and so on. If you're a victim of an actual thing, then yes, you are a victim, and acknowledging that on some level is important because it's just true on some level. However, applying it to everything in the world all the time is not helpful. In the things acting on you kind of direction that is helpful is the presumption that God calls upon you in some fashion, and then you acknowledge his existence or some ordering force or principle in the universe that is all encompassing that you don't understand quite, but you want to know more of. And follow the principle that leads to good things for more and more people, including yourself, as much as possible. So those are the up and down, good and bad, agency, or me have an impact on other things versus other things have an impact on me, kind of relationships. On the me impacting other things, it's agency versus God complex. On the things occurring on me, it's God calling me versus victimhood, and so on. Now, the people that spiral and can't grasp it correctly for their entire lives, I have to believe that God is going to give them a pity fuck into heaven. However, that might mean even more breaking down in hell or hellish conditions spiritually, afterlife, after all, at first, to indicate that those methods don't work. And there's no way around it. Because people are good at making excuses for why their flaws are secret good things. And this goes for the good people God breaks to build up again in this life. Even Job, in the book of Job, is said to experience his breaking down as a form of refinement for an underlying pride that he has at his core, and so on. And keep in mind, we all have elements of these things on some level. Like, it's just a fundamental part of humanity in this world, in this life. So then the question is, how does God decide? And the answer is, I don't know. But it seems to me that in general, there's a rule. And that is, if you're insistent on going down through victimhood and God complex, then God will allow you to go that far for your entire life, unless he has something big planned for you, because there's some sort of core aspect to you that he's put into you to redeem you in the end. And the reason why I said tragic hero in God's eyes is because I want to insist on God's high esteem for human beings, knowing all their failings compared to his infinite, perfect and totally good self. Now, so we have tragic heroes in some sense, and we call those naturally villains. And then we have chosen ones, and so on. Now, the chosen one is not perfect. When God chooses someone, they don't make them perfect to begin with. They know their flaws, but they say, I can work with them to build them up, or break them down, then build them up. So the question is a matter of in this world or not, in this world or the afterlife, in other words. The up and down approaches of agency and God's care is the way to do it in this world. If you're twisted into your inwards into a bitter little man, then it'll have to be the afterlife, unfortunately for you. Sorry. Because if anyone can save a soul, it's God. Now, I said earlier, it's right to say that someone's going to hell or heaven in a sense, but there's also it's not necessarily true. Just like it's right to act like we have free will and say we have free will, even if it's not necessarily true with an all-powerful, all-knowing, and made everything God. When I say it's right, what I mean is, if you're going to pick one or the other, those are the ones to pick. But if you can say that there's a tension between the two that you don't understand, but the free will and acting like some people are going to hell and some people are going to heaven, it does work for things. It says the direction you're going, and you're taking responsibility, which puts you on the upwards direction, which is the goal in the end for everyone. So yes, that does mean the genocidal madman dictators and totalitarianists are probably going to heaven eventually themselves, cosmically. There's a certain understanding of limited crime does limited time, and infinite is a big, a big space. You can't fill up the infinite unless you're infinite yourself. So limited crime, no matter how big, to our eyes, will be a limited amount of time in hell, I think. But it's going to change you forever, and it's going to be very painful, and so on. Just how wrong you are, wrong-headed you are, and how stubborn you are in insisting on that path is going to determine how hard you have to be broken to re-up into the heavenward direction. So I don't think anyone's going to escape justice. And that brings us to, again, with the Chosen One framework, Kierkegaard's three spheres: the aesthetic sphere, the ethical sphere, and the religious sphere. Now, I've already explained why I think Abraham was called to pretend to sacrifice his son as a teachable moment of how God operates for Isaac, so that the wisdom of how things work would pass on to generations and go to the rest of the world. And this is what the Chosen One part comes into play. When God when God does what Kierkegaard calls the teleological suspension of the ethical, it's not a breaking of the rules, it's playing by higher rules. And God seems to primarily do this with chosen ones. That's why the phrase is, God breaks the ones he chooses. Because he's tearing away the inadequacies so that they become perfected in this life, in some sense. And what that means is the ones he tears down before they rise up higher than ever before are essentially playing out a common human experience to demonstrate the extremes of the validity of that, despite one's own eyes in the very moment when they're naive about this process. It's to show people, not just talk about it, but to show people how it actually looks from their perspective when it's happening and their response to it, and then the results that come out of it. So that's like a thing. So the religious sphere is not the suspension of the ethical in the sense of what's good. It's a very niche category, and the chosen one always sacrifices things for it. Now, it's not that you just sacrifice, like you give $5 to a hobo and you're the chosen one. It's a matter of your position in terms of, or role in disseminating God's operating plan to the rest of the world. It's not a matter of you're necessarily better than other people day to day or intrapersonal or morally or anything like that. It's your usefulness. But God makes you better than you were before as part of that usefulness to shine a light upwards instead of downwards. So, take heart if you're a chosen one. And if you're not a chosen one yet, then remember what I said about God complexes and victimhood narratives, and so on. And what Jesus is essentially real God as an actual victim. How God would react to victimhood. That's what Jesus is. So if it's right for God to be like that in regards to being a victim, what about you, who isn't God and has some guilt on some level, probably? And then you understand the direction you must travel towards agency and responsibility. And oh god, I forgot what the fourth part was. Agency and responsibility. All right, and God caring for you and saying this is for your own good. And you might ask, well, how's that the case? And then I would argue that this world is a proving and refinement and character building environment where we are being prepared for heaven, and we get glimpses of heaven to string us along and develop. You have to remember that according to Christian theology, in some sense, we are like infants or babies all the while we live in this world. We're basically in the womb, the matrix. Matrix literally means womb, like a woman's body that carries a baby. And the real world is when we're born. But remember, if you have a premature birth, you might have a stillbirth, so you don't want to prematurely induce labor or something like that unless the mother's life is in danger, which God is not. So there's no point in going like that. It's not constructive necessarily. Or it would be ideal not to. So yeah, and remember, this does mean the next world is more real than this one, and it's better in every way, and so on. But there's a certain duty to be individuated as much as possible in this life before you go so that you can fully appreciate what's prepared for you and so on. It's delay of gratification in some sense too, which is part of the lessons of life, and you might have to learn it a little more harshly in the afterlife if you don't learn it here, which is that downward versus upward direction in life. And let's see, what was the other one? I lost my train of thought. Let's see, Matrix, womb life. Oh yes, growing pains are a part of the process. Everyone, I think most people have had growing pains when they're growing up, when they hit puberty and stuff, or just before puberty. You know, that's a good description of our spiritual journeys in some sense when we're on the upward path, even if we're on the upward path. They're not pleasant, they hurt, they suck. But they're part of our nature expressing itself in some sense. Now, I don't know if heaven has them, but we're just like, we know better than to worry about it. Or if heaven is without them and we just expand and expand and expand our wisdom and knowledge and essence and so on without any pains. But some people tend to suggest we'll have pain in heaven on some level, but it won't be suffering because we'll know we're taken care of and the pain is momentary and it's for a good cause and so on. And this maps out on Arthur C. Brooks, I believe, saying that struggle before success causes satisfaction, and enjoyment is also part of the process. So it's not like you want to struggle completely all the time without reward, but you know what I mean. It's one of the dimensions of happiness, according to Arthur C. Brooks. And then meaning is another purpose, or another cause of happiness, and you need all three. You need to enjoy things, you need to have satisfaction, which means struggle before success, and you also need meaning or purpose behind something. So I think that wraps up most of what I was trying to say. But basically, I've tied a little Carl Jung, a little Kierkegaard, a little Thomas Aquinas, and maybe even a little C.S. Lewis together in this video. And this summarizes my rough approach to how I've been if I ever get successful and famous and so on. I'm not successful or famous yet by any means. I'm just some random autistic kind of schizo person on welfare. But if I ever blow up, this has been my ethics on some level, and truth-seeking as well. A very hard, like, I don't get it, but I'm going to ram my head into it until I do understand it kind of approach in some sense. And then I'm like backing off a little bit and looking at it and going, can I go around this? You know? Or do I just need more momentum to break through, you know? It's kind of a question I've constantly asked myself about these things. I tend to be a very logger-headed, stubborn kind of guy. Which is helpful in a sense, but also counterproductive in a sense too. But the going at it until I get it kind of thing, in this cosmic metaphysical topic, not letting go of God until He blesses me in a sense, even if I go around the obstacle or back up enough, just enough to get the momentum to break through it, instead of just banging my head like 2 inches away from the wall into the wall. So like running at it like the Juggernaut from Marvel, or just walking around the obstacle instead of just like bumping your head against the wall lightly until your brain hurts kind of approach. So if I ever get rich and famous, this entire existential crisis toolkit and guide kit is basically my instincts or habituated behavior or attitude or something like that, with 130 to 140 IQ, and a lot of studying obsessively, like 6 hours a day of like theology and like preachers and different denominations of Christianity, and a bit of Carl Jung, a bit of Jordan Peterson. Well, actually, I think I've seen almost everything Jordan Peterson's done except his interviews. Watched a couple of those, though, as well. Yeah, Gregory B. Sadler and Eternalized, and a couple other people's reviews of Kierkegaard and Albert Camus, and listening to audiobooks of all C.S. Lewis's serious works, not Narnia or Until We Have Faces or Paralandra or anything like that, just his serious works. And some rundowns of Thomas Aquinas' work and so on. I have never read Aristotle. I only read Plato's The Republic. I might have seen like a list of Aristotle's virtues or something like that once upon a time or twice, but that was like 20 years ago or something. Or like 10 years ago or something. So it's not like I've studied Greek philosophy much or anything like that. But this is my metaphysics. My metaphysical resilience, you could say, in being a broke nobody with mental problems and so on. And I haven't been perfect, but I would like to think that this is the core principle of how I'm supposed to be after God called to me. To eventually get famous and rich down the line, but doing the work first to develop something that will help people out, and then getting discovered somehow, and then by embodying a successful life and happiness and so on, while having gone through all these crises in the middle of Shitsville for living experiences. So there's no way to numb the pain really, except literally from alcohol or something. Or there's no way to cure the angst except by analyzing it. And my relationship to the world that seems to, at the moment, be against me in some sense, with God breaking through, kind of hinting, keep going, you're going to get everything you dreamed of. This is my approach that might be helpful if I am a success story in the conventional or usual sense, to show you what it's like going from the bottom or the middle to the bottom to the top. So that's what I'm making this video set for, and so on. And honestly, even if I don't make it very successful, it's what's kept me going through hardship. So if you want to know if I don't make it in the end, you can look at what's kept me going through all this for this long in those kinds of conditions. So either way, it's basically advice on how to make your situation better on some level. And and you're not necessarily going to see instantaneous results, but it's like whatever. But I am operating under the principle that I'm going to get a breakthrough and make it big, and then this will be a really helpful thing, and I'll get clout for actually succeeding with it, and it'll be very convincing to a lot of people and help them out, and make life better for more people. So, and this is basically the anti-Cthulhu mythos. This is the opposite of Cthulhu mythos. It's basically, Cthulhu is nihilistic existentialist theology in some sense. There is a God, but nihilism and existentialism and atheism have it about right. And if you look too deep into it, you'll go insane. Whereas even in the Bible with King Nebuchadnezzar, it's a funny story, but basically God looks at someone who's basically doing that, and then goes, or like on the path to going there already, and then just bumps it a little bit quicker, and then pulls him out of it, and then lets him be king again with a new appreciation of what his command over humanity represents in a better way. Or similarly, the prophet Elijah with the prophets of Baal, he kind of goes through a similar process to King Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm assuming that's going to be my situation as well. Some sort of cross between King Nebuchadnezzar and Elijah in some sense. Big ask from God, tempting fate to say that I'm going to succeed when there's nothing saying I will. But I think I was promised that I would. So by a verifiable prophet of God's, my spooky spurging and proving prophecy exists with evidence video was literally me showing search terms I did back in the day, because that guy told me to. So it's if you believe the images and you think it's not a glitch in the search system, search engines records, which I don't think it is, because I seem to recall actually doing it back in those days, then it won't come as a surprise if I do succeed, probably.